Hello. Okay, wow, hi. All right, I think we're going to get started. Thank you all for coming this evening and taking time to hear from our amazing arts industry residents. This is the first arts industry lecture, artist talk that we'll be having for 2024. We have 2 more cohorts, so keep your eyes peeled for more artist talks. My name is Sierra Berry. I am the program director for Arts Industry. Arts Industry is an artist residency program offered by the John Michael Kohler Art Center in collaboration with Kohler Company. This residency allows artists the time, space, and support to work in an industrial setting like the Kohler factory, utilizing the industrial processes, resources, and expertise to create their own artwork, which is really exciting. Artists are placed in either the Kohler pottery or foundry and have 24/7 access to the factory, as well as unlimited materials like ceramic, slip, plaster, cast iron, and brass. Additionally, artists also have access to secondary processes like enamel, plating, PVD, which I'm sure we'll hear a little bit about, and many more. Artists are also supported by our technicians. Shout out to William and Nicole. The technicians are dedicated to helping the artists realize their projects and provide technical support, bridging that gap between existing experience and the factory environment. One of the most unique and precious resources that artists have access to in the factory are the Kohler Associates, some of who have worked in the factory for over 30 years, generously offering their expertise to our artists for their project development. Building these relationships is really essential to the program. 2024 marks our 50th anniversary of the program, which is a significant milestone for the residency of this kind. The program started in 1974 when Ruth Kohler, our executive director at the time, saw a piqued interest from regional artists curious about how and who was fabricating Kohler's ware. During a 4-week workshop, artists and associates worked alongside one another, exchanging ideas, skills regarding mold making, art making, and craftsmanship. Over the years, we've had over 500 artists come through the program, challenging pre-existing methods of creation and humbly adapting to the materials and environment of the factory. I encourage you to take a step into our galleries to experience the arts industry artwork, its history, current and upcoming resident work, as well as experience a slice of the factory in the back. Over this year, we will have many events celebrating the 50th anniversary of Arts Industry. Please consider signing up for our newsletter to be notified when we have new exhibition openings, events, and other artist talks like this. I'm thrilled to introduce to you our artists who have been working in the factory. Each artist comes to the residency with varying skill sets, concepts, concerns, and a vision, and it's been an absolute pleasure watching their work evolve. After each artist presents, we encourage you to engage with the residents in the cafe for refreshments and conversation. So without further ado, I will introduce to you our first artist, Kathy Shao. Kathy, yes. Kathy Shao is a Chicago-based artist and educator growing up between the U.S., Taiwan, and Hong Kong. As a member of the Kuomintang Army, her grandfather participated in the inaugural legislation of the Republic of China, and this history informs much of her work. Shao's practice is one of personal, cultural, and material translations of complex intersections of ecological, political, and digital space, particularly across the global south, in multidisciplinary installations of sculpture, sound, and imagery. Previous work offered growing indigo as a response to the 2019-2020 Hong Kong pro-democracy protests and recreating in large-scale casts memories of her childhood in Asia. Shao holds an MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where she was a New Artist Society Merit Fellow from 2014 to 2017, and a BA in History and Art History from the University of California, Berkeley. She's a 2019 New City Magazine Breakout Artist, a 2020 Graham Foundation Artist Grantee, a 2022 Hopper Prize winner, and a 2022 Fountainhead Artist in Resident in Climate and Environmental Sustainability. Recently, her work has been shown in exhibitions at the Chinese American Museum of Chicago and the Fountainhead Biennial at Emerson Dorsch Gallery, among others. Please welcome Kathy Shao.
Okay, got a clock here. Okay. Thank you, Sierra. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Excuse me if I stumble a little bit on the mic. I'm not quite used to speaking into a microphone. So I'm excited, also a little nervous. But that was a really amazing introduction. And I just wanted to kind of briefly preface the talk to say I'm going to focus just on 3 projects tonight and talk about the contextual research and background to those projects that kind of led me to Kohler. So I won't be necessarily trying to fit everything in because I know we're a little bit short on time, but I'll just start right away. So this is actually a new piece that I made here at Kohler. This is a computer mouse that we actually iterated a few different times with both the 3D printing department at Kohler and then also my own fabricator. And so for me, this sculpture, though small, really encapsulate a lot of the things that I'm thinking about, especially also because it's both ceramic and also been layered with titanium through the physical deposition process. So I think I'll just start by first saying thank you to Hava Krivchenia. This is a photo from the show that just opened. I'm so grateful. You guys, this is the hardest thing I have ever done in my life, like by far, by very far. Each artist's experience is different, I know. And for me, this has been one of the most positive things that's ever happened, but the learning curve is so intense and high. I just want to start by saying thank you to Hava for inviting me. I think I saw you sneak in somewhere, so sorry for embarrassing you. Hava wrote a really beautiful text for a presentation I did at Expo Chicago that I'd love to share with you guys, and I can send to Sierra later, but it got sent out as part of the press release for Expo for a gallery that I was working with, and I'm just immensely grateful. But also, it takes a factory, so just saying all the thank yous now. Thank you to everyone. There's so many names, but just definitely, obviously, Nicole for working with me through everything from the beginning to the end, driving my artwork to Expo. If I know I'm also going to embarrass all of you, the engineers, the interns at PVD, also Valjohn, all of the model blocking, and Jim, all of model blocking, everyone on the floor. Just, I could not have done any of this without all of these people just being there, especially the night shift. So shout out to the night shift because I'm a night owl, so I'm there from like 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. every day. But a little bit more about me. So this is a photo from where I grew up. This is in Taiwan, but this is more, instead of Taipei, which is the capital, the main city, this is Taichung. So that's more in the center of the country. And these are lotus fields that we grew up in a very rural area. There's tons of flower industries that spring up in Taiwan. I'll talk a little bit about that. We're actually one of the world's top producers of flowers. So you probably don't know this, but many of your flowers, and if it's an orchid, almost 99%, it was made in Taiwan at your table. But these are the lotus fields outside of where I grew up. I was a late child, so my dad had me, my parents, but also my dad had me when he was very old. He was about 55 years old. And so a lot of my upbringing kind of tends to have this remnant of histories that are perhaps a few generations back. And we were very poor, but very well educated. And so I think this is like a very specific, not unique phenomenon by any means, but just something that also generationally happened to a lot of folks after the war, right? So these are kind of images of him when he was stationed at various places. And so him and also my mom's side of the family, my grandpa, they fled from China, or they traveled from China to Taiwan during the war. But they retained this sense of being really interested and wanting to bridge the divide. So technically I'm half Chinese, half Taiwanese American. And so all growing up, this history is deeply embedded kind of in our familial history. And we lost an uncle, who got left behind, and we were not able to ever find him. And so this idea of kind of wanting to make contact and wanting to engage with communities, both of blood, but also just of culture and of just other communities in general, is something that stayed with me and kind of comes from, my family. So one of the things that became really interesting to me in thinking about this kind of political familial history and also the ecosystem where I grew up is just simply this idea of my national identity and cultural identity. So Taiwan actually, according to most sources, has the world's largest factory. Kohler has a very cool, amazing factory, also many factories. But this is, according to many sources, the world's largest factory, and so it manufactures semiconductor chips. So every single iPhone in the world, even now, iPhone 15, the chip for it, basically the microcomputer inside your phone, is made in Taiwan. And sometimes, when we talk about there's so many different ways to talk about identity. And I felt it was always something that fascinated me, that not everyone is able to relate to this island that's like off of China. No one is always going to be able to bring it to mind, but everyone has a phone now, and everyone needs their phone to be able to communicate and connect. And so I became really interested, again, thinking about how to connect these kind of diasporic experiences through things that we all need and use every day. But also, I will say, I have to call out that the most the most famous, our most prized possession is this factory. And we're investing. There's a factory in Arizona that's happening. I'm sure you guys all know. There's even actually an act of Congress that has written this into law under Biden. But our most prized possession might be the meat stone, which is like the small, tiny sculpture in the middle. So it's in the National Palace Museum, which later I'll talk about. I've been using their digital archives to source imagery. But it's just a piece of granite that looks like our favorite dish, which is stewed pork. And so they decided to put it on a pedestal, and it is now literally, there's also a cabbage, like a piece of jade that someone carved into a cabbage. These are the two most popular, most visited. This is our Mona Lisa, basically. So these are the two most popular, most visited artworks in the Taiwanese National Palace Museum. But I will say that as an artist, I've always been fascinated by kind of how we get from point A to point B. So these are the National Arches in Utah, and then this is an image of silicon extraction. And so just thinking about what it means to kind of relate to an idea of an environment and ecosystem, because I grew up around just fields and fields of lotus flowers, and I ran around in the mud, which is kind of atypical, I think, for my generation. But again, my dad had me when he was older, and thinking about what it means to trace that process. And so I just included, I use a lot of social media posts kind of covertly in my work, so I'm using it in my presentation. But I included a post from my own IG that talks about, there's this report that the Center for Land Use Interpretation in LA produced where they trace the architecture of the Broad Museum from facade to source, which is where the quarries are, where they extracted the cement. And this is kind of my inspirational touchstone for a lot of what I do. So I wanted to put it out there. And I started actually in textiles. I went to study, I come from craft background. I went to study textiles, and I did this trip to Mexico and Oaxaca. And this is actually in Etla. This is a former textile factory that has hot pink steps. What? So this textile factory used to produce tons of cochinilla, which is, a very famous dye that grows on the nopal, and they actually also have farms that grow it and harvest it and produce this color. So before synthetic dyes were invented, this was how they produced color. And actually the runoff from this factory, because all of the wastewater from dyeing, because dyeing requires a lot of water, So all of the runoff from this factory has stained these steps. They've also been refurbished. So it's no longer a factory. It's now like an artist center that an artist took over, a Mexican artist. But it has stained these steps this pink color. And this is cement and concrete steps. And this was one of the most beautiful works of art when I first saw it that I've ever seen. And I completely fell in love. And I was like, how do I do that? So I started trying. These are tiles, not of ceramic, but these are tiles of cement, but also, so I source a lot of white Portland. So you can buy white Portland. So that's why they're able to retain color differently and not have a gray cast. But I am kind of a chemistry nerd, which is why I immediately gravitated toward PVD. But these are basically test tiles that I did where I used natural dye techniques but applied it to cement. And so in most textile dyeing, you need to have wastewater that is recycled or disposed of afterwards. But if you use a material where the water is required as part of the hydrolyzation process, you actually don't have any wastewater. So it's not that it's necessarily more sustainable, because cement is actually not a very sustainable material. But for me, it was just like a really exciting way to experiment with these. So you can see there's leftover, you can't really read the writing, but it's leftover avocado shells. All of these things are refuse from your kitchen. There's shallot skins, onion skins, garlic skins, and these are the colors that you can extract from them and apply to this material. And I teach at SAIC, and this is just a syllabus that I had for a class that was actually in the textile department. But the same principles, the underlying kind of, not scientific, but definitely vernacular science, like citizen science, craft science that has been passed down is deeply embedded in the work. So during COVID, I actually started growing indigo leaves in my own apartment just because we were all in lockdown. I couldn't go anywhere. And the indigo became a sculpture. So this is the indigo sculpture that eventually became part of this show at the Chicago Cultural Center. And I think this is one of the shows that maybe Hava saw. So this show was a work that I did not only just to grow indigo, but also as a response to events that are happening in my home countries. So there were a lot of pro-democracy protests around the same time as the COVID lockdown, but of course I couldn't go. So I just was watching on the news, like my family all live over there. So I was watching on the news how they were spraying streets with this intense blue dye and like staining protesters. And as an artist, I just wanted to respond to that. And being locked in my apartment, I decided to grow indigo and also kind of recreate my own childhood of Hong Kong. So this is candy that I used to eat all the time in Hong Kong. And these are the doors of the Forbidden City Palace in Beijing. This is a motif I use a lot, very often. So I translated that, I kind of domesticated them as an individual, like how do we access these structures of power? So I domesticated them and used that motif. Am I running out of time? I can't. Oh, okay. Sorry. I can't tell with the clock. But yes, so I guess just to pause a little bit, these are photos that I saw on Apple Daily, which is a newspaper, and also Instagram that got shut down. So the government actually shut it down, and this newspaper no longer exists. And so definitely I think a lot about these things of circulation and censorship, but also kind of soft power. Like we as a country, Taiwan doesn't have a lot of political status, but we have a lot of manufacturing power. This idea literally of like being here at this factory and what it means to have a factory environment reinforce and think about modes of production, but also that supply chain, because I think we all know that many things that are, well, I would say made in Taiwan is totally made in Kohler, but many things made in Kohler might be made in China, made in Mexico, made in Vietnam. And so it's not to say that, there's positives and negatives, but almost all industrial manufacturing in the West is now going through this process. And what does it mean to infuse this manufacturing process with other infrastructures, such as having a residency when artists can come in and actually be able to access the factory and be able to make these connections with their own interests in production. To me, that is completely invaluable. And so the project that actually is the main focus of what started my project here was a show I did at the Chinese American Museum of Chicago, and it was called Made in Taiwan. And it was simply just making a statement that, you know, things are made in Taiwan, and what does that mean? So I used two things that were of particular interest and concern to me. One, the fact that this label, so you can see, or I'm sorry, you can see in the next slide, this artist label that is referencing a cool text. So that's the title of the work, which is on the wall, like the vinyl on the wall. And it's called the country of origin label. And it's just such a simple thing. You know, all of us growing up, we have like toys that are made in Taiwan. They're not really high quality. They're like plastic. You can buy them for $5. I actually met another artist who did a project in Taiwan. They're from Puerto Rico. And their whole project was about how all of the trinkets in Puerto Rico that are meant to represent their culture for tourists are made in Taiwan. And this idea of like, we make a lot of the world's products, but also, you know, what is that relationship like? Because actually, for many different reasons, this text is censored. So you're not allowed to put it on specific products. One of them being, unfortunately, the iPhone. And so because of the fact that, you know, there's complicated relationships between the straight, so I simply just wanted to have it exist. It's such a complex but simple thing to say we exist. Because the other thing is, I started to become interested in using artificial intelligence to generate some images of porcelain for making, you know, the show. And when I was researching it, like, I wanted to use only apps that were available on your phone. And when I was researching it, I found that some apps, not all, but definitely this one is the most, it's definitely the most stringent by far. It censors just the word in every single prompt. I have so many other images where it's like, I love boba tea in Taiwan. Just anything with Taiwan, it just doesn't allow it to become possible, which is so crazy because artificial intelligence is literally the production of images and content that is not possible otherwise, right? It's using machines to go beyond human imagination while harvesting human data at the same time. And so I felt it was so incongruous to literally the idea of artificial intelligence, both in its positive and negative aspects, that the entire show kind of then pivoted towards using AI or this particular app to generate the images. And I still use this app to generate some of the images, as you guys will see in the show. But you can see some PVD. Oops, sorry, I keep doing that. You can see the PVD tiles that I installed at Expo Chicago next to the vinyl that they let me install on the outside facade, and they also let us do a window display. And it was a contest because this is in Chinatown of Chicago, and not every Chinese person is from Taiwan. So we are, you know, the Sino population is spread across everywhere, and it was something I had to get multiple approval steps from the board, from the president. Not everyone was happy with it, but people were open to talking. And I think for me, that's most important. And so these are some of the images of the actual phones that we created. I collaborated with a Cuban artist, and they were interested in kind of thinking about the idea of open source decentralized access to the web, because Cuba is one of the last countries in the world. They did not actually get internet access until 2016 or so. So literally one of the last countries in the world to like have Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi on their phone specifically. So we asked Midjourney, and also we used Lexica to create these images. And I actually love, there is meant to be a sense of humor in all of them because none of them are actually very Chinese. Like, this is one of those moments where we're using an app that's not a very high level AI. You know, it's AI meant for kind of mass popular production, quick, fast production. The images generated are not high quality, so we actually ended up hiring a designer and then separately producing quality images out of it. But there's Japanese, there's Korean, there's definitely American Courier and Eves style images in these, and we're okay with that. We love that, actually. But we did also even kind of create a microchip based on the exact replica. We downloaded the Apple designs of the chips in iPhones. But again, for us, it was important to be able to work with kind of open source software. So I'm just sharing some of the code that the designers ended up writing us some code. So this isn't done through Rhino, or it's not done through Blender. It's done through programs that they're using and kind of creating and writing as they're doing it. We also created NFTs for it, and this is something I tried to make at Kohler. I wasn't super successful this time because, again, creating an object from artificial intelligence is actually super difficult because they create things that are impossible to create, which is why it's so awesome. But they are there, and I'm so interested to keep trying. But these are all, again, AI generated images that we put in prompts for. But as kind of part of the research for this project, I became super interested in the idea and concept of a supply chain. So the supply chain was kind of my conceptual model for that show and continues to be similar to that Center for Land Use Interpretation report on the Broad Museum. So I did a lot of research on what exactly goes into a microchip. And for example, Taiwan producing most of the world's microchips. Well, where do they get all the materials for that? So this idea that things that live digitally have a material life is something I'm really interested in. So this is cobalt and silicon. So these are actually images that we were preparing for publication that we didn't end up making the publication for, but it's still in the works. And that's Robert Noyce, who is one of the co-founders and engineers who founded Intel. He's holding the world's first circuit. I just love that photo. It's such an iconic titan of industry, herald of industry photo. And so when I came and learned that there was this amazing factory process that Kohler is kind of experimenting with that's much more sustainable than electroplating, and actually is able to bond metal to ceramic. The first time, this is from the first slideshow, I think, that we saw. And from that day, I had circled this, and this is exactly what I wanted to do. And so the last image at the end is actually an image that also was shown at Expo. And I'll talk a little bit about kind of how I came to make them. But this idea of kind of how we relate to nature. For me, this is nature. This is nature, even though we don't get to touch it, feel it, see it the same way that we see a flower or plant. So I'll just kind of quickly end with the booth. This was the booth that I got to show just last week, and it was a really amazing experience, and I'm just super grateful. It was my first expo, and I'm super grateful. And so just referencing the images, they're all drawn from the National Palace Museum Archive. This is the press release that Hava contributed a really beautiful text to, and continuing kind of my interest in the National Palace Museum, in the Beijing Forbidden City Palace Museum. There is a reproduction of the dragon that's on top of the roof. Here's just a few more images of the booth. So I'll talk a little bit more about kind of the pieces on the table, but these are just detail shots of what I created here with the help of everyone at the factory. And these I think of as, these are clearly extremely formal compositions. They come from a painting composition. And these I consider kind of machine or chance compositions. So they really come out of my actual inexperience with clay slip casting. I made a lot of mistakes in the beginning and continue to make a lot of mistakes. And I'm also hypersensitive to dust. So these two kind of really prompted me to try to save all of the mistakes instead of letting it turn to dust. So I just grabbed, when you overpour or it just drips, all of those things, I would just grab them and try to squish them into shapes Or sometimes I would let them organically kind of fall, so you can see that that one's just a fallen piece, and there's one over there where you can see little nodes, and that's just the top of another mold. So I just wanted to keep them very simple, but talk about this idea of reclaiming the clay and using it, and talking a little bit about, again, this kind of reuse of materials. Where do materials come from? So for me, it made perfect sense to have these go through the physical, like a paper deposition process, and they're the reclaimed offspring of the formal painterly compositions. And I ended up loving making them, so I'm still making a few of them. I ended up kind of starting to form shapes. And then maybe I'll just end. The last thing I'm working on is trying to kind of build a very DIY computer, but also using the infrastructure of the factory. Like, I'm very interested in these T-rails and how, again, they're an industrial object that gets used in almost everything, and they're very invisible. You know, people don't really notice them, but they're actually what kind of runs all of the structures that are not actual like machines. You'll see it everywhere, but you won't see it at all. And so I got smaller version of these, and I'm hoping to build some parts with it. So this is kind of the inspiration for it, and I'm collaborating with someone who's using other materials. And again, the inspiration for this is, so this image of the tire computer, this is just how they make computers sometimes in Cuba, because they don't have, like, there's an embargo, and there's not enough plastic. Literally, people are just recycling tires or gas cans or whatever they find, and then recycling circuit boards and breaking apart computers and making a new computer out of it. And so this idea of taking these parts that would maybe get thrown away, making something out of nothing. But again, for me, the important thing is, this is not nothing, right? This is something. This is the actual something that allows us to have something. So thinking of this idea of nature as not just like, oh, I'm throwing this away, or thinking of kind of these parts of the environment as like, oh, this is just waste. And maybe I'll end on that. I will say, today's my students' graduation, and I'm missing their graduation to give this talk. So I just wanted to shout out my students. You can see Hava giving a talk to my class, and I think that's a picture of Adra or another artist who's coming soon. And I think I'll probably just end here. Thank you. Okay, just a little bit.
All right. Thank you, Kathy. Next, we have Harold Mendez. Harold is a first-generation American born in Chicago and to Colombian and Mexican parents. Harold Mendez works with installation, photography, sculpture, and text to reference reconstructions of place and identity. His work addresses the relationships between transnational citizenship, memory, and possibly considering how history is not only an affirmed past, but a potential future. His recent work examines how reclaimed objects, makeshift monuments, and images reveal a life parallel to conflict, demonstrating both factual evidence and where traces of fiction emerge. Excuse me. Selected exhibitions of Mendez's work include 2017 Whitney Biennial, Whitney Museum of Art, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, Renaissance Society, Museum of Modern Art, PS1, in New York, Studio Museum in Harlem, Drawing Center in New York, and the Museum of Contemporary Photography, and also, as of last week, is now a Guggenheim Fellow. Let's all welcome Harold Mendez.
Okay, great. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming out. It's nice to be back in Sheboygan, and it's not COVID time, so I can be a little social. And but I want to start off by really thanking Hava for inviting me. I wouldn't be here without her. Funny enough, I had a work from. So the last time I was here, I was in the Foundry a couple years ago. And Hava actually got to see some of the work that was at the Foundry at an exhibition at the Wexner that opened in September, closed in December. So it was nice to kind of have that coincidence of being invited back. And then, of course, I want to thank Nicole and everyone from Model Block and Casting. These guys have all been really amazing and really have helped me really get to my goals and being ambitious as possible. I'm gonna kind of just run through a bunch of images and then I'll kind of land at the things that I've been focusing on here and then some of the things that I worked on in the Foundry. Um, um, I would say I tend to kind of really oscillate between image making and sculpture. Um, and I give myself a lot of latitude in terms of the kind of making. So there's things that really shift in kind of scale and materiality. Also a lot of research-based work. So both of my parents are from Latin America, and so being essentially from two different places, well, three different places. So my mother's from Colombia, my father's from Mexico, and then I was raised partly in the United States. And so these three geographic locations have been really influential in terms of my thinking, in terms of my making. And this has really kind of helped me really kind of consider ideas of geography and boundaries, but also thinking about forms of embodiment. And I think embodiment is a really kind of key word that really is rooted in a lot of my ideas in my work that move from image making to kind of sculpture. This is a really kind of a example of kind of image making in that there's a kind of shift from a negative kind of version of a barbed wire fence that kind of runs all the way through, gets broken in the center, and then kind of shifts over. And then as you get to the further along to the right, it kind of shifts from a kind of like graphite, more charcoal kind of version. And then you can kind of see a few different versions of these kinds of works that often read at first glance as photographic, but are all actually made by hand. So, I don't know, is that blurry? That looks blurry. I'm not sure why. Yeah. Huh. This was actually made in Pages and it was converted into a different format, so I'm not really sure what's happening. So apologies for that. But these are generally one-to-one scale, so that's generally how I determine the kind of scale of some of these more photographic works. And often with these works that are black and white, most of the images are kind of sourced from working with archivists and photographic archives, specifically in Latin America. So working in Mexico and Colombia and Cuba, and really kind of thinking about the camera as a kind of colonial device and how the camera arrived in the Americas, and really kind of thinking far back. Now, photography is really ubiquitous, but the camera actually is a tool that followed both the gun and the Bible. And so it has this really long history of thinking about forms of colonization, forms of representation. They really help identify, or really kind of, in some ways, falsely identify a kind of both a place and a kind of personhood in some of these countries. And so I've done a lot of research-based work thinking about this kind of image making. And so the reason why they're kind of handmade is to kind of have a treatment to them in a way that, for instance, like I'm working with a photographic negative, but then as I'm making it, the image is constantly getting kind of disrupted by the surface and the treatment and all the kinds of removal of the material that I'm making. So there are areas where the image and the surface are almost like unrecognizable, but there's a lot of hand in the work. And this is kind of a shift here, for instance, like, this work on the right is this kind of large scale glass that's made with a welding torch. So I'm thinking about ideas of monumentality, thinking about forms of sort of transparency. And then, of course, I mentioned ideas of embodiment. So in some of my work, animals are stand-ins, or there are other things that I think of the stand-ins as like pauses or breaks. So in this case, vultures lurking. Sometimes there's dogs. Sometimes there's spider webs, and these are often, for me, ways to think about ideas about both death, about a kind of cyclical form of kind of death, and also a way in which these animals can be these kind of pauses, I think. And I think some of these kind of come out from my experiences of living in Latin America as a kid and thinking about how, you would see kind of vultures, or not that, where my mom is from, for instance, like there were these fields where they had these chicken farms, and they would just kind of, on the roofs of them, they would just be, hundreds of vultures just around, and so they would always be kind of lurking. But the way that I started kind of seeing these sort of animal forms is thinking about them as these kind of breaks or these kind of pauses in a place. And when I travel, I actually photograph quite a bit, and I started to kind of notice that there was a kind of recurring documentation of street dogs, and I started seeing the kind of dogs almost as like these kind of commas, these kind of breaks, and they'll kind of reappear later. I'm so sorry you can't really see this, but this is actually like a 9 foot, towering glass. It's all made with a welding torch, where I'm taking like an acetylene torch and basically applying soot, almost like you would do like with a candle. So it's totally on the glass. So it's known as a 19th century photographic process called cliché vert, which is a very unique photographic process where you can kind of create a photographic negative without having a camera. So the way that I'm making it is all basically removing all of the soot in order to kind of bring out the image. And so it acts as both a kind of a photographic negative, but also as a kind of sculpture. So I was really interested in, Canon image also function as a kind of sculpture. I don't know what's up with these images. Sorry. This is quite monumental in scale. It's probably about 20 by 20 feet. And, at a distance, it really looks like you're seeing a car sort of slowly sinking into this kind of submerged water. And this is just a short video of me making it, so you can kind of see the surface. I'm working with little X-Acto knives to basically clean the surface. I'm sorry that the image is so small here, blurry. In 2013, I was invited to be an artist in residence at the Cohort program in Houston, which is a 2-year residency. And it's funded by the Museum of Fine Arts. And so during my breaks, I would spend a lot of time in Colombia, and I would start working with archivists there, looking at their national archives, and came across this image of these pre-Columbian artifacts. And this is actually, the original image is a death mask that's made out of gold. And this is actually the one photographic image that made me really start thinking about embodiment and really thinking about, we, in a Western idea, the gravestone or the grave is really kind of the marker in which we consider the final point in terms of one's kind of ending and or sort of an identifying marker. But if we look beyond that, or even before that, the way that the poetic description of thinking about, well, how did the inscriptions become a thing on tombstones is actually something that was associated to Greek poetry, and really thinking about these forms of kind of embodiment. But even further back, thinking about in the Americas, the way that death and life is a really kind of cyclical thing, and it really kind of comes over and over. And this is actually a work that, let me see if this works here. Oh, damn it. Okay, this video, oops, sorry. Let's see. Okay, that's not working. So this started off as a photographic image, and then it becomes this kind of sculpture. So this is actually something I made for the 2017 Whitney Biennial. I was able to work with, of all people, Tiffany and Company. They commissioned 5 artists to do these special edition projects, and I was like, yeah, I'm game. Like, I'm up for working with you guys, but I didn't want to make like a functional thing. I didn't want to make like something that was like jewelry. I didn't want to make a silver pitcher. I wanted something that was really in line with my body of work. And so I proposed to make this death mask vessel that would require water to get poured into it as a way to kind of finish the sculpture. So a lot of my works have these ephemeral aspects to them, where water or flower petals get placed into them. But it's about the size, of an actual face. It kind of fits in your palm. It took about 9 months to make, and it has this really beautiful iridescent sort of pigment to it that's all made out of sterling silver. And so all the, like the teeth, the nose ring, the eyelids, all that is sort of protruding out, and the nose and the nose ring sit outside of the water. So I was really wanting this vessel to kind of function as both, on one hand, a form of embodiment, thinking about death, but also as a kind of mirror, but then also having an ephemeral quality that is really kind of activating the sculpture so that it is not a static object, like we think about static objects in a kind of museum. This actually has a sound component, but it is I'm assuming it's not going to work. So in this is actually at the Institute for Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. So this is like this fiberglass grid. These little white specks on the floor are all flower petals. So throughout the course of the exhibition, the museum is tasked with basically placing all these fresh flower petals on a continuous basis. So there's this constant caring for the thing, making the thing living, but also making sure that these petals are accumulating. And so you're looking on the wall there. So as you can see, the flower petals here, and this is this kind of sort of tree root that's cast in bronze. And then on the back wall, I worked with the Field Museum in Chicago with anthropologists, primarily from the Americas department. And I was really interested. I had shown them the work that I made in the sterling silver, and I said, can you show me other things that are in the collection of the museum that speak to these forms of embodiment and forms of transformation? And so I landed on this, what is a chimu pot in Peru, which are often found in ceremonial or in graves, as thinking about these kind of forms of transformation. But what you're looking at is that there's a little monkey on the top that sort of has its tail wrapped around the spout. But it is, on the one hand, it reads as a kind of mouth, but it also is a kind of a seed pod. It's called a vilca seed pod, which is a kind of a hallucinogenic vessel. And so often these vessels could be filled with water, or they could be filled with other things. And so I worked also with the Experimental Sound Studio in Chicago, and I had this found recording of I listen to a lot of music, and I'm really interested in poetry and literature. And I used to listen to this podcast called Stay Inside by Earl Sweatshirt, and one of the rappers from Standing on the Corner. And, they just have some really amazing kind of collaborative music. And I came across this found recording of this man speaking about how should I say this? He was sort of contemplating the crises of being, right? Of being a person, and what it means to kind of struggle with being in a body. And so I worked with the Experimental Sound Studio and have this kind of sort of found recording, and the recording is basically moving around all these 5 different channels. So the sound becomes a kind of a sculptural thing. So I wanted the voice to occupy the space in a way that, like, I think, we can think of like political acts or political speeches, like Malcolm X, for instance, comes to mind, or other political figures where their voice in a kind of audio or in a kind of public space can really occupy not just, one's imagination, but it can occupy a real physical kind of space. And so I wanted the voice to also act in a sculptural way in this kind of installation. So essentially what I'm doing here is articulating all these different forms of the body, right? There's the ephemeral, there's the more historical that is pointing to a kind of vessel, there's the kind of sort of root that is sort of grounding the viewer in a kind of non-site architecture space. And then of course there's the voice, right, which is constantly moving. And so when a viewer would come into the space, the audio is constantly changing. So the way that we worked on it at the Experimental Sound Studios is that the voice is constantly changing. So it's never the same thing. There would be certain words where the software would pick the certain words and really kind of amplify or really kind of give these kind of dissonant sounds. And so, that really kind of came out of when I used to live in Houston. Well, I lived in Chicago for a long time, and when I was a kid, I used to go to this place called Maxwell Street, which was like a kind of open flea market, and it was always like blues music, hip hop, a lot of political speeches being presented there. And then when I moved to Houston, I lived in the 3rd Ward, and was really close with a lot of the folks over at Project Row Houses. And one of my neighbors was a former Black Panther Party member, and on Sundays he would play all these political speeches, but then he would also play like Fela Kuti and all these. So I really like this idea of the voice really kind of amplifying a place. And many years ago, I was in an exhibition at the Renaissance Society. It was called Several Silences. Really, really just an exquisite show. And it was all these ways that silence can be kind of expressed. And there was one artist from London where he made this recording of Princess Diana's death, or everyone mourning. So you hear all this kind of crackling, all these different sounds of just a public space, but a kind of silence. And that's happened very few times. Most recently, listening to Pharoah Sanders' last concert before he passed away in Hollywood. These are some reference images. So kind of going back to kind of ideas about the Americas, which will show up later. This is actually a spread from a publication that was released from the University of Chicago Press maybe about 2 years ago. Okay, I'm sorry. Apologies again, the images are really blurred, but what you're looking at here is known as a quipu. A quipu is an Andean textile, which is essentially, there are these threads that have these knots, and the knots are essentially markers to, there's like an accounting system, so it's a knowledge of body. So, I mentioned the word embodiment, and I also think about these forms of knowledge that really kind of go from one extreme to the other. So something antiquated like this, there's not a code or an understanding of, what this means. But in Andean pre-Columbian period, all these knots had a very specific kind of connotation, of marking either an event or like a debt paid. So this is actually titled "This Time" with a double S, so it's sort of like a slur, if you will. But you can see this is a description from one of the manuscripts here from Peru, and these figures are actually holding a quipu, and many museums have them. The Met, the Field Museum in Chicago, and they're really, really beautiful. I think of them as bodies that have a sense of knowledge embedded in them, but not really understanding their full narrative, right? And this is actually Incan king, but I wanted to show this because of the floor. And I'm sorry it's so blurry, but I really love the tile floor. It's just a gorgeous drawing. And I made this kind of 13 plate lithograph, which is, it's really thinking about conquest and thinking about being uprooted in the Americas. And so some of the work that I've been making here is sort of pointing to some of that. All right, I'm just gonna zip through some of these because these are not looking good. But oftentimes I will, also kind of switch from, making work that's more research-based or, things that are that maybe are more institutional, and then also kind of thinking about things that I collect, right? When I'm traveling, making assemblages, taking pieces of obsidian, the sterling silver, these kind of large feathery tapestry works that I'm, working on collecting. And then I'll kind of, do something that is incredibly meticulous and will take me many, many, many months. But this is actually a work that was in my last exhibition in Los Angeles. And I think, both of my parents, as I mentioned, are immigrated from Latin America. And I think for me, I really think about migration as also kind of form of embodiment and the way that migration moves, right? And there are these kinds of networks. I'm really kind of thinking about both these places of the Americas as being really kind of, for me, a kind of map, really thinking about a constellation. And so there's this kind of zooming in and out of these ideas that I'm thinking about, both in terms of place and in terms of sort of identifying, like, myself as an artist, but myself as a person as well. But it's all, the white webs are actually all cut in this paper, and then they're all silver leafed, so they're very, very delicate. The back has almost like this kind of honeycomb open surface, so it's very airy, almost like a kind of tapestry, but it's all made out of cut paper. This is a few works that were in the show at the Wexner, which Hava saw, and then this work here on the floor is one of the works that I made here when I was at Artists in Residence in the Foundry. At the time, I was really dealing with a lot of mourning. I had a lot of family members that had passed away, and so I wanted to make this work that was about a group of mourners coming together and basically placing these objects. So this kind of more brass-like thing as a headrest that I carved, and then used that carving with a kind of fabric over that and cast that. That was insane to make. That was like 13, 14 molds or parts, and it took me 4 times to do it. So I got it right on the fourth. And so these are a few of the things that I was making. How am I doing on time? Okay. I'll just zip through some of these. I also made these cast boxes that were part of a project that I did in Cuba. In 2017, I got invited to Cuba to go on this sort of exchange program through the MacArthur Foundation, and it was operated by the Mexican Fine Arts Center. But I went there looking specifically for the grave of the late Cuban artist Bel Quisayon, and in doing so, I went to one of the oldest cemeteries in Cuba, and had taken some photographs of these cardboard boxes that were filled with all these flowers, and so I wanted to kind of make those works in the foundry. So I actually cast like 4 different cardboard boxes, all these different iterations, but they're also kind of these vessels, if you will. But they have all of the corrugation from the cardboard, all the tape, so all the details are really in there. So it has this kind of heaviness with this lightness in terms of this accumulation of the flower petals. And then, of course, I'd shown that sort of sterling silver death mask vessel when I was there working at the Tiffany Company, and then I continued doing here. I'm also interested in the things that make the things. So I would collect all these polishing wheels. The polishing wheels would often just be discarded, but they would have all these precious metals. And both of my parents worked in factories for the majority of their life here in the United States. And so I was really interested, not so much in like the precious metal per se, but really interested in their labor and the accumulation of labor as the value in the work. And so I kind of wanted to make a work that was sort of related to that. And so I've kind of continued them with these sort of sculptural things. This sort of relates to this. This is Cipetotec, which is a Aztec deity. I'm not going to go into it, but you can ask me about this later. It's a really fascinating story. Here are the dogs. So this is a recent lithograph, but their eyes are like glowing. Oh man, these photos are not. I'm just going to zip through these. So these are. Actually, funny enough, I'm reglazing these downstairs and firing them. These are all made out of volcanic stone, but are functioning as these kind of divining pools. And they are inspired by, in Machu Picchu in Peru, there's this room when the first day of sunlight comes in, I think on the summer solstice, the light hits these pools and they're really kind of luminous. But the reflecting pools were also like these kinds of sites in which you can kind of divine into the future. You can kind of read the stars. And so I'm making versions of these here in the pottery. And so I'm almost at the end. This is just an installation view of work from one of the galleries. It was between 2 galleries from the Wexner. I mentioned earlier that geography is really a key kind of thing in my work, and I kept thinking about all the things that I'm referencing, thinking about the Americas and being a first generation American, and really kind of toggling between being Latin American, but also being American, and really having this duality constantly, and really kind of thinking about expressing those things in these multiple ways. And so like a year or so ago, I got invited to go to Dubai and went to the Louvre, and I saw this stick map. which is incredible. It's the best thing I saw in the entire museum. So it's actually used as a way to navigate in the Marshall Islands. And so you can see there's like these little stones that basically are used to identify different islands. And they would use it to kind of navigate before they would get on for like before they would navigate the seas. And so I started thinking about my own parents' migration from Latin America into the U.S. and really thinking about this kind of constellation. But it's not just like an endpoint. It's a circular thing, right? Where I still have family there. I still go there. So I wanted to make this work that was quite massive in scale, that was both kind of a map and a constellation. And so I'm using these carpenter's rulers as a way to think about an accounting, but also a measuring device, and thinking about the ways in which like the map and the constellation can be the two things that can also help navigate one's past, but also one's kind of future. And then this is actually more recent work, which is work that I made at the Center for Contemporary Ceramics in Long Beach. For a long time, I was really interested in making these other kinds of vessels that would essentially have both the ephemeral materials that I would be using in other works. So these are sculptures that are all like in porcelain, terracotta, and stoneware. And essentially I'm sorry you can't see them, but there's a lot of really amazing detail, but they're essentially these burlap sacks, if you will, and all the materials that are inside are all symbolic or ephemeral organic materials that I'm placing inside of them. And that's what gives each of the bundles its shape. And then they get burned out, and so it creates like kind of all these ashes, they're like these urns. And so, so this is actually from a show that I just opened last week in Chicago at Patron Gallery. So if you're in Chicago, pop in. So it's a 2-person exhibition between myself and my good friend Jamal Cyrus. So here's a different view of them. This is another text-based piece. That is named after Tupac Amaru, who was the last Incan king in the Americas, or the Incan Andean Empire. And I really like this idea of this figurehead being the very last symbol of sort of indigenous and Andean resistance right before conquest. Also, Tupac the rapper is named after Tupac Amaru. These are a few other works. Also been making these very small vases that hold both the water and these kind of flower elements. And then this is actually, oh man, sorry guys. This is actually the thing that I really kind of worked on here. And basically it's this kind of woven pattern, this woven tile, which is based off of basket weave pattern, but is often found in the Americas. And in pre-Columbian manuscripts, you would often find figures like placing tributes or offerings, or maybe figures would be depicted being married or sacrificed, or you might see deities and gods. So I like this idea of this kind of threshold being both a space in which the daily can occur, but also the very kind of symbolic and spiritual that was maybe kind of beyond one sort of humanness, if you will. And this is sort of my reference image. And then these are one of the basins. Shout out to the PVD crew who really helped me kind of bring this thing together. And that's filled with water. Unfortunately, you can't see it in this, but and then I would just finish here is this kind of spine, which model block and casting really helped me figure out how to produce. So it's all made out of porcelain. And it's about 25 feet in length. So I originally worked with these found pine cone pieces, fused them together to kind of make a vertebrae, and then worked on, we had them 3D scanned and then 3D printed, and then basically they're kind of arranged from a kind of ascending to descending order. And this is only like a half of it, so I couldn't fit the whole thing in the sculpture or in the show. But Marianne.
Thank you, Harold. And I'll have my laptop out for when we're in the cafe. We can look through some of those images that were unfortunately a little blurred out. So up next, Marianne Cluth. Marianne Cluth studied at the University of California, Berkeley as an undergraduate and received a BFA from the California College of Arts and an MFA from the San Francisco Art Institute. Cluth's work has been shown at the Contemporary Jewish Museum, the Oakland Museum of California, the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History, and the Las Vegas Contemporary Art Center. Her artwork has been featured in such publications as Art Week, Art News, and Harper's. Her critical writing has appeared in Art Limited, KQED, Stretcher, and Art Practical. Let's all welcome Marianne.
Thank you, Sierra, and thank you again to William, Nicole, Brian with an I, and all of my, and Brian with a Y also, and just everybody that has helped me make my work here. It's been a journey, and everyone has really contributed. So thank you. And there is me in the foundry. I'm actually now working in the pottery. Let me just... Okay, so this is a title I stole from a paper by Jeff Gisa that he published in American Affairs. He is a kind of gross right-wing troll and went to Stanford with Peter Thiel and has been writing big angry things about Trump getting kicked off Twitter since that happened. And he was trying to encourage, especially right-wing thinkers, but pretty much everybody to consider social media and the internet as a new terrain for ideological warfare. And I had just, let's see, okay. So this was a painting. It took me 14 months to make. I had horrible postpartum anxiety, and Trump had been elected, and what else was going on? Oh, and COVID was going on. So I was I was totally brain broken, all the way. And so this is kind of about, I was thinking a lot about Bam Margera and how to prevent my newborn son from being kind of sucked into the manosphere. How do you raise a little boy with the internet and have them be safe and good. And I was escaping into Animal Crossing a lot. Anyway, so that's what's going on. So this is what I was doing. And I had a show at CCSF and entitled it Terrain of Discourse. Let's see. And this was the other painting, which after I made that first painting, this one only took me 6 weeks to make. I was unblocked and fine, but it has a lot of the same imagery. There's a picture of Bam that looks like kind of Saint Sebastian, where he's being shot with all the arrows, and I took that. There's also in there Lotax, who was one of the early, how do I even describe Lotax? So Something Awful was one of the early forums, and it was about the same time as 4chan. And Lotax was one of the early forum moderators. And he kind of is one of these source people for the current state of right-wing trolling on the internet. So I was looking at pictures of all of these people that kind of, thinking about embodiment, kind of embody the things that I was scared of, and I was fixated on and kind of starting to research. And we had just moved to the suburbs and everything was actually beautiful and fine, even though I was kind of obsessively focusing on kind of the worst things I could think about. So I just overlaid them all together. It's all just the beautiful Christmas lights and sunsets, and then these people that just want to blow up the world. So that showed with this installation, which is kind of the culmination of a long body of work that I'm not going to get into here, but for about, let's say, 12 years, I'd been taking pictures of theme park landscapes, not the narrative parts of the theme parks, but just the stage sets that simulate landscape. I was really interested, I've been interested in the idea of simulation for a long time, and I was thinking about how to talk about how our culture like constructs images of landscape as part of the way we construct our national identity. And so I was copying like foundational romantic landscape paintings of the United States using theme park landscape. So this is actually an installation. It's like a stage set, sort of. It's about 17 feet wide, and it includes like there's stuff from next to Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, like the little waterfalls, and the spiral trees are from Fantasyland. The clouds are actually from Sanrio Pearl Land and outside of Tokyo, and just like Splash Mountain and the Matterhorn at Disneyland. So that was kind of where I was when I started to think about coming to Kohler. I had also like fallen deeper down like several Twitter rabbit holes. So yeah, I just started following and like reading everything Jeff Gisa was putting out. I got like algorithmically funneled into something called effective accelerationism, which also sometimes calls itself teapot, like this part of Twitter. And they're all people influenced by this philosopher named Nick Land, he's just like a grumpy British raver from the 90s, but he really is like, he's very pro like ethno-fascism now. And there's a lot of sort of people in venture capital and in crypto, and especially Clearview AI, which is this like face recognition company, that are really influenced by his kind of like fascist vision of the future. And so I could talk a lot about all of these things, but I will move on and we can talk about this later. I got really interested in click farms, which is one of these hacker setups that Teapot, among other parts of Twitter, really utilize. And so this is like, Kathy likes receipts. I also like receipts. This is here on the right, like my favorite, like weird astroturfing example I came across in 2023, and it's people trying to stir up drama about that like Titan submersible that was lost briefly, but like I'm not really. It's just not even clear. Like it's just trying to be divisive. It doesn't have like clear goals. But this is something like it's also referred to as astroturfing. So click farms are involved in astroturfing, where they try to make it seem like an issue is a bigger issue than it really is. It becomes really hard on social media to tell what's real and what's fake. So when I got to Kohler, I eventually wound up in the pottery, and I wanted to make click farms, which I didn't know how I was going to do. But this is actually cast porcelain that I have tinted pink, and then applied a digital decal on it. So it's a picture of the Matterhorn that I have made with AI, and I'll get into that later. And then I've like kind of replicated the kind of network of chords, trying to dramatize like the chaotic, I mean, everyone here is very polite, but the clusterfuck of it, and like how that feels to just be networked together for, the past like 10 to like 20 years. It's just felt like worse and worse and worse. And I wanted the pieces to have that feeling. So that, so far, this is the only one I've like fully completed, but I have another week, so we'll see. Let's see. And so this is some EAC stuff, the effective accelerationist. Ahmad Mostak is one of the founders of Stable Diffusion. That was the AI company that I used to do my decals with. And this is him actually getting, like someone's like dunking on him on Twitter, calling him a liar and a grifter and saying he doesn't know AI. He's like been super bombastic about how like all the information is up for grabs. Like when they trained Stable Diffusion, which is their image generator, like they just don't respect intellectual property, and they just took everybody's data, and they've been total pirates about it. and very unapologetic, but eventually Silicon Valley even kicked him out, which is impressive. So I used Stable Diffusion after they stole all the images off the internet to train their model. I then used that one because I wanted to use an image of the Matterhorn, which we'll come to, which we'll return to. So this is after a painting that hangs at the Met next to Washington crossing the Delaware. But I wanted to then put it back in Anaheim, which is the Matterhorn that I'm familiar with, and had Stable Diffusion also put a palm tree in it. So that you can see is that's the image applied to the cell phones. Okay. And then I wanted to work with imagery that Silicon Valley considers really meaningful and is like their kind of mascot. So the half dome in Yosemite, I just like made it the mega half dome, and had several sheer cliff faces and like several bridal veil falls and stuff. And this is in progress. I'm going to put all the chords on, but this is where it's at. It's fired, and it's the decals are applied. And this is like 108 porcelain cell phones. And this is, I just wanted to like include the prompts that I'm using, because Stable Diffusion also has a bunch of like blog posts teaching you to use their products. And it's like specifically saying like, how can you make it look more like Scarlett Johansson? Or how can you like make it look like more like the person whose material you're trying to steal? So I just actually, my prompts are just lists of paintings that I like. And like, so it's Thomas Moran, Bierstadt, Frederick Church, Thomas Cole. And that's actually how I achieved the images, is just by like stealing the data. So here's one of Lake Michigan. And you'll see this is the prompt for that. Let's see, am I going really long? Okay. And so it'll be like just all this kind of stuff I want to steal, and then at the end it'll be like, okay, make it like an oil painting, but also a DSLR high-res oil painting, Hudson River School. Oh, here we go. And this is one I was trying to copy the FE Church painting, the icebergs, which is one of my favorite paintings. And then I just like set it in the Grand Canyon. And so this one is one that I was thinking a lot about, the phrase après moi, la deluge, which is like a kind of revolutionary cry, but it's also something that Louis XIV said about like not caring. He's like, because people were like, well, you know, what's going to happen after you? What's the line of succession? And he was like, after me, I don't care. After me, it's the storm, like whatever. Which the storm is kind of also like an alt-right image that keeps getting kind of put into conspiracy theories, like, oh, just wait for it, just trust the plan, the storm is coming. So I was just thinking about like the storm and the deluge, but then it's like, it fits with climate change, it fits with so many things that are kind of part of the terrain of discourse, like part of these things that we can't seem to agree on and that are so stressful and also so important. So let's see, and this is, I just got it by saying like, make me a picture of Niagara Falls and make FE Church do it. So, and then this is one, so there's a meme like among these like right-wing trolls of the Giga Chad, who is like the most masculine, the best at everything, the richest, the smartest, the most successful. So this is like my Giga landscape. It's like the most rugged, masculine, like it has like mountains and mesas and waterfalls and a storm and the sunshine. It's got all just the Giga landscape. And so this is it on 96 cell phones. So yeah, and then after this, I just have a little bit about my sort of previous work. I'd been taking images of theme parks and thinking a lot about like Disneyland and simulation, and the way that that Disneyland, like Baudrillard had written about Disneyland, and how it sort of makes it seem like the rest of America is not infantilized, but like in fact, many of the like kind of foundational myths that our country is built on are infantilizing. So I don't know. I was interested in like, well, then what isn't an infantilized landscape? And these are some of the photos that I took over a very long research project, going to Disneyland many times. So, and then from those I took these selections and I just used Photoshop. And this is like, the selection tool in Photoshop is also kind of an early AI tool where it's deciding where the images end and where things should sort of stop. And I just was letting it do that because I think that like the digital artifact is interesting and part of the process. Okay. And so then in 2017, this is just about that project that I did here at Cohort. And this is my proposal image. Like a friend had recommended me, and I didn't actually know anything about the program. And I was like, well, I'm just gonna make a Matterhorn out of Matterhorns, because that was the mountain I was thinking about. So I came, and I was interested in like making a Matterhorn that actually tilts the opposite way, because you'll see here that the Matterhorn at Disneyland tilts the same direction as as an image of the one in the Alps that we're used to seeing. But if you actually go around the other side of the Matterhorn at Disneyland, it makes the Matterhorn that tilts the wrong way. But if you go around to the other face of the real Matterhorn, there's like it makes a totally different shape. It's sort of not an interesting point with these photos, but moving on. So here's the one at the Met that I'm like obsessed with, and this was a digital collage that I made using my the photos that I had taken over that research project to try to match kind of at least the composition. And here are the receipts, Kathy, about it actually does hang there. And it's like Bierstadt was not born in America, and that's not an American mountain. It just looks like it's just a pink phallic shape. Like it doesn't actually have anything else to do with like American art. It's not. Anyway, so it hangs there, and it's always bothered me. So I just sort of tried to overlay it over a Bierstadt painting of Yosemite Valley. Just try to like superimpose it the same way, and think about putting it back in Anaheim. That's kind of my like obsessive thing. I just want to put the Matterhorn back. So there, it's back. And then these are the little fragments I used to make my ultimate collage. So this was the collage that I used to do the project here at the Kohler Pottery in 2017. And I came here, and Kohler Associates helped me figure out how to tint the slip, and I made kind of dump molds, which are like the basic, it's one part mold. I didn't have to like engineer anything. But then I could paint into the mold using tinted slip. I didn't have to glaze it. It's a very matte finish. And so that is actually how then they all came together. And so it's a Matterhorn like tilting the opposite way from the way that we're sort of used to seeing it. And I built out the rest of the kind of stage set using those pictures from theme parks. And that was up at the Oakland Museum for about 5 years, and it will be coming back to the Art Center in August. Thank you to Laura. I'm very excited to talk to you more about that soon. And that is my whole presentation. So thank you for listening.
Thanks, Marianne. All right. Our next artist is Justin Favela. Based in Las Vegas, Justin Favela is known for large-scale installations and sculptures that manifest his interactions with American pop culture and the Latinx experience. He has exhibited his work internationally and across the United States. His installations have been commissioned by museums including the Denver Art Museum in Colorado, Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in Arkansas, the El Museo del Barrio in New York. He is the recipient of the 2021 Joan Mitchell Foundation Fellowship, and he holds a BFA in Fine Art from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Please welcome Justin. Oops. Oh gosh, what did I do? Sorry. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. And shout out to Tanya for bringing me out to Kohler. Never thought I'd be in Sheboygan, especially for this long. And thank you for letting me talk about myself. It's my favorite thing to do. And I'll keep it brief because I am hungry. So I'm just going to go through these slides pretty quick, kind of give you an overview of my work before I got here, and then show you what I'm doing here. So when I first started making art, I'm born and raised in Las Vegas. My mother's Guatemalan, my dad's Mexican. They showed up in the 80s because guess what? The U.S. just started a civil war in Central America. And so they had to go, my mom had to go somewhere. And there was plenty of work in Las Vegas. And so the Las Vegas to me is a very special place, and I really love being from there. There's so much inspiration. When I first started making work, I kept looking at neon signs as inspiration because Vegas does neon like nobody else in the world. And this is one of my favorite signs. This is from the Stardust, originally built in 1958 during the atomic age. And their sign, which was put up in the late 60s, is actually in the shape of a mushroom cloud. It used to be pink back in the 60s. And now when they went corporate, they changed the font to this Futura bold, condensed, the mother of all typefaces, and then changed the cloud to purple. But this is the Stardust cloud that I grew up looking at, especially waiting for my grandparents to get out of work. They used to work at the Dunes right across the street. That's where the Bellagio is now. And so when I first started making art, I didn't really have much money. I was in art school. And so I had cardboard and a lot of leftover paint left over it. And I wanted to make a piece about my family, but also about being from Las Vegas. And I took a lot of inspiration from this. So this is one of the first sculptures I've made. This is Stardust. That's how my grandma says Stardust. And so this kind of continued, and I kind of started thinking of the neon sign as kind of the Vegas vernacular, and as well as like this visual language that I could kind of start poking fun at the art world. I was going through all these art history classes and learning about all the great whites, in history like they teach us at school. And so, and at the same time, there was a lot of art coming to Las Vegas. A lot of these hotels, including MGM International, they built City Center, started buying all of this minimalist art and a lot of this like blue chip art to kind of decorate the casinos, which was wild, and to show Las Vegas, what fine art really was. And the rest of us are standing around like, okay, so what about us? Like we've been here, there's an art scene here. And so one of my first solo shows was actually at the Clark County Government Center. The Government Center, this is City Center, so I made replicas of a lot of the work that was at City Center in my Vegas vernacular. So here's the same piece, made flat like a neon sign in panels. This is actually after Henry Moore, probably named something like two reclining shapes, made out of travertine marble. And so after I did the show, it was quite successful because if you copy the white canon, institutions pay attention to you. And so I started doing that as kind of my shtick for a little while. And also kind of pushing away from making art about my biography and my trauma, because that's really what is expected of people of color in the art world. And so I started looking at work by artists like Donald Judd, who I just couldn't believe, and I still can't sometimes, that these people can get away with this. Like, this is a metal cube. Oh my God. That's wild. And so I wanted to make my own versions of them, kind of tongue-in-cheek and in the old kind of Chicano tradition of parody. And so here's my cube, 1,095 tamales. So how many tamales, Guatemalan tamales, it would take, if I ate 3 a day for a whole year, this is what it would look like, piled into a cube. My mom and my grandma helped me make this one. This is a piece by Carl Andre. I think you guys got one here in Milwaukee. It's a floor piece that you can walk on top of. And this is my floor piece, Flor Sombrero. So this piece is also about like reclaiming cultural symbols. I took a sombrero from Party City, I dipped it in gesso and painted the exact same thing on top of it. Oh, so conceptual, right? Art school. Okay, and so then I started looking at other symbols of Latinidad, and a lot of my peers and a lot of my mentors kind of kept pushing me towards making art about my identity. And so I said, okay, I'm going to use the corniest, cheesiest symbol to represent Latinidad that I can think of. And I Googled piñata in, I think, 2007. And this is the first image that came up. And so this is my piñata, the first piñata that I ever made. And so it's called Donkey Piñata. Very creative at naming my pieces. And so I said, all right, great. I'm going to make this piñata, get my sad boy art piece out here for my thesis show. And, 12 years later, I'm still making piñatas because it was such a hit, and with piñatas, there was so much that I was working against, but also so many layers, literally, that I could work within. Piñatas are about celebration, but they're also about destruction. The piñata as a symbol itself comes from like religion. Catholics actually used to, in Spain and Italy, and then eventually in Mexico, use the piñata as a symbol for Holy Week, for Lent. So you would break the piñata open. They would blindfold you. That represented your faith in Christ. They would spin you around 33 times because that's how old Jesus was when he died the first time. And then that you would hit the piñata, and if you were able to break it open, you got the reward for not eating candy for 40 days or whatever, not drinking Diet Coke or whatever people do now for Lent, which is ridiculous. But anyway, and the piñata is also about migration and about commodification of Mexican culture, which are themes within my work to this day. And around the same time that I started making work in piñata, I started to learn about my own history, Mexican art history, Latin American art history. I met a young professor at UNLV, Dr. Emmanuel Ortega, who is now teaching down at UIC. And I went and sat in on his classes at UNLV a few times, and I learned about this artist, Jose Maria Velasco, who was also part of the problem, like the many painters that Marianne was showing, but painted these amazing, romantic, beautiful beautiful paintings that represented the nation of Mexico. Before Frida, before Diego Rivera, there was Jose Maria Velasco, basically showing the world the beauty of Mexico, or at least that's how Mexico was selling it. But really, when you look at paintings like this and paintings from the Hudson River School, it's just an extension of colonization, right? To show who actually is working the land, who owns the land, and who is documenting the land. And so these paintings, this is el Popocatépetl visto desde Puebla, Atlisco in Puebla. And so that's the famous volcano, the two famous volcanoes, actually. You can see the other one in the background. Mexico City is just on the other side. And in this painting, you can see that there is the beginning of Cholula, this small town right in front of Atlisco. And yes, that is where the hot sauce comes from as well. And so this painting was actually showed at an early, Chicago Expo to show the world the beauty of Mexico, but also to show industry that there's plenty of space available for you to move in and build your factory. So you can see little billows of smoke to show you that there is a railway coming, and that you too could colonize Mexico just like the Spanish did. And so And so looking at these paintings, I thought, well, what's a way for me to kind of show this romantic, fluffy, commodified version of Mexico is turning these into actual piñatas, right? So I developed this painting style. I call these paintings, piñata paintings, where I have been actually trying to translate all of Jose Maria Velasco works into piñata paintings, and I think I'm like 52 paintings in at the moment, and so those are all available through my gallery, so you can check them out online at justinfavela.com. Okay, and so this piñata style just kept going, and I kept going bigger and bigger, and I started making these murals. So this is a mural I did, an installation I did for the Denver Art Museum. And looking at the Mexican muralist movement, I kind of combined different genres and started making these big collages of landscape paintings, and those eventually became like full-on like immersive installations. So in this installation is actually called Fridalandia, and it is landscapes of Mexico City stitched together, and the recreation of Frida's garden from the 2001 film Frida, made out of piñata as an experience that people could walk through at the Denver Art Museum. And so, after looking at art history, I started to look at more contemporary symbols that represented Latin Americans, and specifically Chicanos, first, second, third generation Latin Americans in the United States. And I stumbled upon this car. This is the Gypsy Rose. The Gypsy Rose is probably the most important lowrider to come out of California, out of East LA. If anybody remembers the old TV show Chico and the Man, you could see it cruising down Whittier Boulevard in the opening scene of the sitcom. It was souped up by the Valadez family, the original iteration of this 1964 Impala was done by Jesse Valadez and his family in 1970. This is like the third version of it. Lowrider kind of always keeps evolving as the family kind of fixes it up and keeps painting it. And the car itself as a symbol in the United States, it is like American progress, right? Henry Ford, the conveyor belt and the assembly line, right? And so it's for Latinos to take this symbol and really make it their own art form is just so poetic to me. And so I was actually so obsessed with this car that the lowrider scholar, Dr. Denise Sandoval, found out that I was interested in responding to this work, that she asked me if I would be willing to be in an exhibition about cars at the Peterson Automotive Museum, where I was able to make a full-scale piñata version of the Gypsy Rose, which is now on tour. I'm the second version of her. She's going to be at the Perez Art Museum opening in May, part of Chicanx Body, which is a big group show that's happening. And so, yeah, the Gypsy Rose is a common theme. I keep making more and more versions of this car. And, when I make it, I think about the matriarch that this car was made for, and Gypsy Rose Lee, who was the original like burlesque star that they made it after, and thinking about like the materials that I use and how a lot of times one of the reasons why I keep using tissue paper and cardboard in my work is because everybody keeps telling me to stop making art in tissue paper and cardboard because it is not archival. And when somebody tells me not to do something, I just keep making things in the same material, and I keep making them bigger and better. So, anyway, changing the subject, a lot of the work that I've recently been doing is really based around food and the globalization of Mexican and Latinx culture through fast food and through like the mid-century version of Mexican food. There wasn't many Mexican restaurants in the United States before the 1950s, and thanks to Glenn Bell and Taco Bell and the invention of the hard shell taco, Mexican food and Mexican culture was able to span the globe pretty quickly, and by the 1960s, we had Mexican restaurants all over the world. And so Taco Bell, I gotta say, is one of the most incredible restaurants known in the world to science and food science because of all the research that goes into making this food. And in 2014, when the Doritos Locos Taco came out, the shell is a Dorito. That's wild, right? My world, I couldn't believe what was happening. I said, what even is a taco anymore? Like this isn't even, I feel like I'm living in a simulation, right? And this is not even a symbol that I can reclaim because it's already too far gone. And so I actually started to attempt to reclaim the taco as something that is actually Mexican or Latin American by consuming all the tacos in the United States. And so since 2014, since April of 2014, I have documented every single taco that I have eaten. And it started on the app Vine. Rest in peace to Vine. It doesn't exist anymore. And now I keep doing it. I have an Instagram account, Taco Takeover Project, where you could see really gross close-ups of my mouth consuming tacos. I think they let you do like 30 seconds to a minute on there right now. And so all of this research has led to many projects, including working over at the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft, where the curator, Catherine Hall, and I started to research all the Mexican food that was invented in the United States that is thought of as Mexican food, like the combination plate with, an enchilada, 2 tacos, guacamole, a side of rice and beans, nachos. There's debates whether they were invented in LA or on the border in Texas. And of course, like fajitas, chile con carne, the Navajo or Indian taco, puffy taco, depending on what region of the Southwest you're from. Those are all inventions of the Southwest. So I like to make these really big sculptures because, like I said, institutions love when you copy the white canon, and I love Klaus Oldenburg. And when you make really big things, they also like that. So really big nachos. This piece is called, I think it's called Super Nacho Supreme. Yeah. So that leads me to the work that I'm doing here at Kohler. So I've already been doing work about Doritos and the Doritos Locos Taco, but I wanted to really start by focusing on the early days of Frito-Lay and the Dorito. The Dorito was made available nationwide in 1966, and by 1967, they were actually taco flavored. One of the first foods that was flavored something different than what it actually was. So before this, Doritos were just corn chips, and so now they're taco flavored corn chips, and it really revolutionized food science. And now pretty much anything that we eat is artificially flavored or naturally flavored. Thanks to the people behind Frito-Lay and one of the best snacks in the world. Please sponsor me. If you put this on YouTube, make sure you tag them. Okay, so looking at this, at these chips, and the word actually Dorito does mean little pieces of gold. We worked the first the first 2 months on making over 120 Doritos. So you can see out of brass there, and I'm actually making little pieces of gold with in the foundry here. And that is, shout out to William, my model right here. William is the technician over at the foundry who has been amazing, very patient with me because, I use scissors and a cutting mat. So working with saws is not my strength. But now I'm really great. I could, cut stuff with my eyes closed. So this is us starting looking for a flask, which you see here for this Dorito that I made in the studio, and we eventually made big cardboard Doritos out of cast iron there. And then as I've been here in the factory, I wanted to make a piece that was specific to my time here, and the original Kohler motto is just so epic. It's like when I remember talking to Marianne about it, I was like, where? Because she said it to me. He who toils here has set his mark. I said, what verse of the Bible is that? I need to reread that part. I don't remember that. And she's like, well, it's on everything. And then I started seeing it all over the place. This is in an old control room in the foundry when I was getting a tour. And so I wanted to make a piece about this saying, and then I really started to think about also all the Latinx workers that are in the factory, that I didn't expect there to be so much diversity within the factory, within the associates actually making the work. Sure, in the offices, it's as expected. But on the factory floor, especially during second and third shift, there's a lot of Mexican workers. And so I got to go down to the Kohler archives, and I said, hey, what do you guys have anything related to Mexico or the Latin American community here at Kohler? And this is what they sent me. So in 1970s, Kohler developed their new cool hot color, Mexican sand. And I actually got to talk to Laura Kohler yesterday, and she said that her mom and dad developed this ad campaign themselves, and she apologized. And so, the funniest thing to me is that she's wearing a Spanish outfit, like not even Mexican. Not that she's white, because there's white people in Mexico, everybody. So, and then there's like a Navajo rug behind her, and I'm pretty sure that's Peruvian, the rug right there. But it's a small world after all. So. Mexican sand, this font is just iconic. It reminds me of so many fonts that I've seen on TV shows and different theme parks. And so I was just obsessed with it. So then I made the font out of clay at the same scale as like if I was the model, which I envisioned many times. And so this is the clay body that I made with the font. And then I went down to where we pep set, where we make the sand molds to actually cast everything in metal. And I asked my friends that happen to be Mexican to step and leave their mark on the piece. So this is Marta, who has been here for a few months. Tomas has been here for 3 years at Kohler. Juan has been here for, I think, 3 years as well, and his dad works here as well. He's Juan Jr. And then over there we have Rafael, who is a badass, who helps us clean the pep set machine. And so they left their mark on it, as well as Harold and myself. We walked across it. And then we were able to pour these in cast iron. And I'm working on cleaning them up right now and actually getting them cast. Mexican sand color was actually discontinued last year. Had a long run, I know, that's with the same name. And they are reformulating it for me. And we're gonna actually enamel these on Monday in the Mexican sand color, and they'll be a floor piece. And hopefully I'll get to show them here at the Kohler Art Center. And I know we're running out of time, but if you can't get enough of my work, I do have a book for sale here at the bookstore, Justin Favela, Fantasia Fantasy. It's a monograph of like the last 10 years of my work. Hundreds of pages in this art book, designed by a really cool firm in Austin, Texas, called Group Project. Thank you.
Okay, one more round of applause for all of our artists and their hard work. And thank you all again for coming. We do have some time, so please join us in the cafe for some refreshments, some snacks, and some conversation with our artists if you have any other questions for them. Thanks again for coming, you guys. I really appreciate it.